Ronald Kessler, what does roast beef and the FBI have to do with one another?
Has a lot to do with the FBI, and it's also a funny story. An agent in New York wanted to have lunch, and he went around the field office around the corner and went to a deli that he thought was one of those establishments that offers a special deal to FBI agents, either a discount or more food or whatever. So he went in and he ordered a roast beef sandwich, and the counterman piled on the slices, and then he shoved it over towards him, and the FBI agent looked at it, and it just didn't look like anything special. It wasn't any huge amount of meat at all. So he pulled out his FBI credentials and he said, "FBI, more roast beef." And the counterman just sort of looked at him. He didn't know what he was talking about because it wasn't one of those special establishments. But the story soon spread all around the FBI, all around its field offices and throughout the world because it tells you a lot about the FBI, and agents, just break into peals of laughter when they hear it. And that is that with those credentials, with the official authority of the FBI, you can do what Superman does almost. You can wiretap, you can break into homes, you can even shoot people under certain circumstances, you can get all this damaging information from the files, you can bypass airport security, you can get into movies free, on and on and on, but it has to be done with official authority, with approval by the Bureau, and not to get more roast beef. But the story continues because when agents are dissatisfied with anything, they say more roast beef, or if they want to tell their supervisors that they showed their credentials, they say, "I roast beefed them." So it's just sort of a great legend, and the truth isn't quite that. I actually found the individual who was responsible for this little gambit, and he claims it was actually a corned beef sandwich, and there were a few other details that he says were slightly off, but basically it was a true story.
After talking to FBI agents, where is their number one choice to go with the FBI?
In terms of future
duty?
It often just depends on where their hometown is. They they frequently like to end up back home. The last place they want to go to is New York because they don't like the violent crime there. Not that they don't want to pursue those kinds of cases, but just in terms of getting mugged on the way to work, it's not much fun, and living costs are high, and some of the most bizarre personnel incidents occur in New York.
Because every other chapter or so is about a city in your book, let me just ask you about some of these places and what were the things that got your attention in each place. Let's pick Dallas.
Dallas had a wonderful case involving the Banditos, this motorcycle gang that would kill people, engage in drugs, all kinds of things, thefts. And in order to penetrate this, the FBI took over a bar and actually operated it and eventually made a profit. And an agent working undercover was the bartender and supposedly the owner of the bar. And it became a hangout for the Banditos. And so the whole place was wired and video cameras all over, and everything that went on was taped. And they would discuss their deals. They would discuss, when they're going to hijack some truck or even murders that they committed. And every night the agent would dictate reports to another agent, and eventually almost 100 Banditos in 4 or 5 states were arrested as a result of that. But one of the most difficult parts of it was trying to avoid some of the various presents that these Banditos offered the bartender, because they befriended him, and one of the best presents that they could offer was lovely young girls who were sort of part of their harem. Each Bandito would have 4 or 5 girls who would be so-called girlfriends, and so they would want to offer sexual favors to this FBI agent, and he had to try to finesse his way out of it because he couldn't very well do that, but at the same time he didn't want to seem to be a law enforcement type who didn't want to engage in that type of thing. So those are some of the little frustrations that you encounter in the FBI, I guess.
Go back in this story in Dallas. To start with, is that a big office?
It's about a medium-sized office.
Where's it located?
It's, let's see. Oh, it's in some nice new part of town.
I remember you writing about West End. I mean, did you go there?
Yeah.
Did you travel to these places?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but you know, it all starts to run together after a while.
It's probably not fair for me to pick out you know, specifics in here, but to go back to the FBI in a place like Dallas, do they live well there? Are the offices nice?
Yeah, it's over a nice Mexican restaurant, and it's fairly nice. You know, carpeting and you know, very high security devices, of course.
And go back to that story though about the banditos. How do they buy a bar? How does the FBI buy? And whose idea was it to do something like that?
They had a previous owner who wanted to give it up, and so they made a deal with her whereby she would keep the liquor license in her name, but the FBI would operate it and would assume all liability. Eventually, it just sort of disappeared, I guess, because she didn't want it back. And the idea, you know, typically will originate, you know, either in the field, in a field office, or in this case, I think it was in headquarters where the idea originated. And the agent actually was based in New York, and they purposely brought him in from another city so that he wouldn't be recognized.
And what was the purpose? What were they after?
They were after real hard evidence that they could show to a jury that would convict these people. You know, these days, juries are used to seeing videotapes or listening to tape recordings. They don't want to hear witnesses, and a lot of times witnesses are wrong. I mean, the best way is to have basically a sting operation, which is where you can videotape everything that happens.
And how did they, I mean, was there an individual that went there and ran it and took over, and as far as everybody that came in there thought he was the owner?
Right. It was this one agent who was undercover, and he would have long hair, and he was a real tough guy, and he had a lot of experience in running bars, because before he joined the FBI, he'd actually operated some bars in New Orleans. And the FBI does, in fact, like to get new agents who have some kind of professional background in almost anything, whether it's jewelry or running bars, because that can often be used in these undercover operations.
Did you go to this bar?
No. By the time I did the book, it was closed.
How old a story is this, by the way?
I think it went down about 5 or 6 years ago.
And you say they put cameras and recording devices. What, if you sat at the bar, all those conversations could be heard?
That's right. Yeah.
Is this legal?
Oh yeah, they would get court approval for intercepting conversations in that way. Of course, in this case, since the FBI basically owned it, they could probably do it all by themselves. But whenever they do electronic interception, they get a court order.
How many FBI agents are there in the country?
There are 10,300 agents, and then about 23,000 total employees, including those agents.
What kind of power do they have?
It's a lot, you know. It's much more than any local police department, for sure, and probably more than most foreign law enforcement agencies, in part because of the tremendous resources that the FBI has. The FBI laboratory, you know, which is so advanced, and the fact that they can call on resources of other law enforcement agencies, Interpol, the CIA. So if anybody's gone overseas, they can track them down that way. There are tremendous techniques that they use, such as profiling of criminal suspects in serial murder or rape cases, where they actually describe in great detail who the subject probably was, and then they actually find that person, which isn't to say that they don't make mistakes, and there are a lot of screw-ups and embarrassing incidents that occur, but overall they're very successful, as we saw in the World Trade Center bombing case recently, and also the fact that they aborted the planned bombing of the UN.
Do you have to have a special education of any kind to be an agent?
You have to have a 4-year college degree, which is different from a lot of other law enforcement agencies. And then they usually do take people who already have established professional reputations. They've already even been stockbrokers or accountants or lawyers.
Was there a time, I just vaguely remember, there's a time when either CIA agents or FBI agents had to be either lawyers or accountants?
That was one of the many myths under the Hoover regime, that they all had to be accountants or lawyers. In fact, only about roughly the same percentage as today. About 15% of them are lawyers, and about 15% of them are accountants. But again, you know, they really want a diverse background anyway. They don't want all lawyers or all accountants.